Welcome, and good morning. We are getting set up to stream live on YouTube, and it's a pleasure to be with you this Friday. I don't know about you, but this week has been hectic and we've had a ton going on. So I'm super excited to have you guys on and continue in our 5-week webinar series. So far we've touched on understanding what managing up is. We've touched on breaking that down even further. And today we're going to focus on navigating difficult conversations and constructive feedback and the role that plays when you're communicating with your leader or your boss, and how to be strategic about it, and see behind the challenge that's in front of you, right? So that's one of the areas that I think becomes challenging is we focus on how a situation in front of us is making us feel. We focus on maybe all of the insights and information that we have that maybe others don't. And so that kind of sets us up to move into a complicated way of communicating. So let's go ahead and dive in. So if you haven't met me before, I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Management Cues. And so very briefly, Management Cues is a training organization company, and we provide a unique approach to learning. We are actually scientifically proven to work. We measure and manage and track performance as we're training, and we really focus on what the managers are experiencing in our program, to reflect not only the environment that they're working in, but that we can actually deliver results and that retention of what we're teaching is actually taking place. So very much a passion of mine and of our team. And let's go ahead and take a dive from there. So today, we're going to be covering what managing up looks like during challenging conversations, because awareness and self-awareness play a role in how effective we are when we're managing through a difficult communication or situation. We're going to talk about understanding why difficult conversations happen in the first place. Believe it or not, there's a method to the madness. It's very common. The challenges that take place in a workplace environment or between a leader and their subordinate, it's always common underlying reasons that take place in the workforce and are just something that's going to happen. So the importance of managing up and the high stakes involved, just being strategic in a challenging situation, requires awareness of what the value is, what the exchange of value is. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the strategies, and the scripts and the frameworks that you should be considering in application and practice, so that you're not in a challenging or difficult conversation and feel like you don't know what to do, right? Because that's what changes it from something that is effective, that allows you to be strategic, and turns it into just a challenge that just sits there. We'll talk about building trust through upward communication. And last but certainly not least, we will touch on constructive feedback and being efficient around that. And I say touch on it because we actually offer an in-depth constructive feedback training, because it is that layered, actually. All right, so let's get into it. As we go through it, feel free to enter comments or questions in chat. I will open it to Q&A at the very end, so please don't be shy. And if there's something that you want to share, absolutely do that. I will be keeping an eye on chat, both on YouTube live and in our Zoom chat room. So just go ahead and plug it in there, or feel free to unmute yourself. Okay, so managing up during challenging conversations. So managing up, we talked about in the first session, isn't about manipulation or confrontation, right? It's not about taking a stance. It's about communicating clearly and collaborating with your leader in a way that works, that's effective. So that means using strategies that foster trust. It means maintaining professionalism and aligning your goals with theirs. And in challenging conversations, it means keeping that dialed in. It means having a reference point that is what is taking place and what needs to happen for the better outcome, for the greater good. So Understanding why difficult conversations arise in the first place. So, as I mentioned a minute ago, there's a method to the madness in workplace, and we frequently come across very common things in the workplace, things that we should anticipate as managers, as leaders, as professionals. And so, here's what happens in the workplace that's commonly creates a challenge when you're trying to manage up, or when there is work to do with the relationship between you and your leader. Okay. So unclear or shifting expectations. And the assumption that clarity is there happens all the time. It really requires you following through in your execution of communication to confirm that you're all clear on both ends and that the agreement or the place that you've landed on is actually what both intended to land on. So, disagreements on priorities or strategy, again, another common place. Sometimes we have insights to things that our leaders or our bosses don't. That is not unique. That is actually common. And so the managing up component is us giving them insight, shedding some light on certain things, but knowing how to do it, right? That's the whole strategic component of managing up. It's performance concerns on either side when we're not being transparent about something that isn't working because we don't want to make somebody feel bad, or we feel like we don't have the authority to comment on performance. And the reality is that that's not true. If we're looking to perform and improve and continuous learn, that's where the constructive feedback comes into play, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. Having unrealistic workloads and deadlines, when we're burnt out, when we are stressed, there's only so much we can give, and we tend to be short. And so with people. So when that happens, our managing up muscle starts to shrink, right? Because we're not thinking about strategy. We're just trying to get through the moment. And so those things make conversations that are difficult even more difficult. Lack of recognition or feedback. So in the exchange between ourselves and the leader in managing up, if we constantly feel like we're getting avoided, or we're getting neglected, or we're not being acknowledged or recognized, that can affect how effective you are in managing up. Miscommunication and misunderstandings, conflicts in working styles and values, requests for resources, support, or clarity. Navigating change and uncertainty is another thing. That nervousness, that angst that creates, kind of hinders that managing up muscle as well. And then compensation and promotion discussions are often a little contentious, often require us clarifying our impact, and all these things that make us a little bit more vulnerable, put the boss or the leader on the spot. And so these are commonplace in exchanges that we have in the workplace. And the lack of psychological safety or trust. So having difficult conversations is easier when there is trust in the relationship. And so you labor trust when you're managing up in order to have an opportunity to have difficult conversations. That's the point, right? It's not avoiding or not having them. You should be having difficult conversations. If you're not having them, you're probably not being honest enough with what's happening in the workplace or between you and your leader. And so personal boundaries, lastly, time, tone, respect, having an understanding of what that means to each person is critical when managing up. But these are all common things. So the importance of managing up in high stakes communication. So part of what is a huge benefit in managing up is that you gain ground and you're able to advocate for yourself. You're able to push the button. So here are things you have to consider. Power dynamics are at play. You are speaking to someone who controls aspects of your role, advancement, and evaluations. And so, for that reason, practice requires you to kind of step into these areas There is a risk of misinterpretation. Poorly communicated concerns can damage relationships or credibility. So you want to be conscientious, self-aware, really get to know your leader, which we talked about in session 1 and 2. And by the way, if you missed it, it's on YouTube at our Management Cues channel. So just go to YouTube at Management Cues and you can catch up on the last 2 sessions. Job security concerns. I think this is one of the most common for managers that I've seen, or anybody who's looking to manage up and navigate their professional career, especially when there's a job performance situation, organizational change, or conflict is already at play. Yes, of course, that creates kind of that high stakes situation. And visibility and perception matter, right? So yes, you want to be seen, you want to be visible, and that pressure of needing to have that acknowledgement or recognition plays a role and creates high stakes. So limited room for error. Unlike peer conversations, mistakes, tone, timing, and delivery carry more weight, right? So part of managing up is understanding how that plays out and keeping your feelings, your emotional control in check as you're navigating, right? So you're very much navigating, and then career trajectory may be influenced, right? So we are often concerned, if I say this, if I do that, if I'm really honest, then maybe I won't be able to move forward or move on. And last but not least, cultural and systemic factors always are at play, especially as we are more global. And so dynamics can be related to some of that. And so these are things that, yes, are at play, which, by the way, is why managing up is such an advantageous thing when you are able to really, really master it. So here are some strategies. So we talked about kind of the highs and lows in difficult conversations. We talked about what's common. Those are all points of information that should help with self-awareness and should also help diagnose in your environment, right? What is really happening here? So strategies for managing up during tough conversations, start with fundamentals. Don't overthink it. Prepare in advance. So clarify your goals, gather facts, and anticipate questions or concerns. Lead with curiosity, not confrontation. And that sounds easy, but it is not, right? Come with a set of questions versus statements, and have it lead the conversation. Ask open-ended questions to understand your boss's perspective before responding. And so if you're going to have a tough conversation and you're practicing managing up, what I suggest is thinking of, what could I say? What could I ask that would help me learn more about the person on the other end? That alone will help you open up your mindset a little bit about dialoguing with your leader or boss without having the title get in the way. Use I statements, focus on your experience and observations rather than placing blame. So again, this is such a simple thing, but it gets hard. So you want to frame it as you want to understand better. You want to get to know them better. You want to know what you can do differently. Having that shift in mindset diffuses the tough conversation almost immediately. And I don't think I've been in an exchange where that hasn't happened, versus using the approach of, you did this, you didn't mention this, you shared it too late, right? You guys get the pattern there. Like, that creates a threat response, and it's actually proven in neuroscience. We have more headspace dedicated to threat than anything else on our brain, right? So because we're wired this way, what we do in these situations actually sets up the success or failure of the exchange. So stay solution oriented. Bring options or recommendations, not just problems, and align with their goals and priorities. So in session 1 and 2, we talked about that alignment and what it looks like when you're managing up to align with your boss. So a good question for you right now is, do you know what your boss's goals are and how they connect to yours? And if the answer is no, start exploring that a little bit. Definitely check out session 1 and 2 because we broke down how to do that. So, as we continue to look at more strategies during tough conversations, you want to be able to regulate your emotions. I think that this is one of the hardest things to do because you're in a tough exchange. So, you're going to feel some kind of way about it. So, stay calm, respectful, and composed, even if the conversation becomes tense. Time it correctly. So, being timely is so important and critical to communication. Choose an appropriate moment when your boss is more receptive, when they're not overwhelmed or distracted. And I really recommend asking that before having the tough conversation at the very beginning and saying, how are you feeling? Is this a good time to have this conversation? Are you feeling okay? Can we move into it? Because sometimes we're just not ready to have a difficult conversation or as ready as we could be. So follow up in writing, summarize key points and agreements to ensure clarity and accountability. When you're managing up, it's all about being in sync with your leader, your boss, and not only understanding them and seeing them as a person, but knowing that things are on track, right? And you don't know that if those things aren't dialed in. Know when to pause or when to escalate. If the conversation stalls or becomes unproductive, step into it and say, it doesn't seem like we're moving in the direction we need to move in at this time. How about we pause and pick it back up in an hour or pick it back up tomorrow once we think through what we just talked about? That's managing up. You don't have to be a leader to do that. You're stating your disposition, you're helping diffuse the issue, and you're helping people navigate through what they're experiencing based on what you're observing, right? So it also allows them a moment to check themselves in the moment. Practice active listening, show that you're engaged, and reflect back by stating what you hear and checking for understanding. So saying, did I get that correctly? Did I understand that the right way, right? Saying those types of things reinforces that you're trying, at least at minimum, to pay attention to what the other person is trying to communicate during these tough moments. So here are some proven scripts and feedback frameworks. I listed them so that you guys can Google them. So if you're on a chat right now in Zoom, if you could just tell me, are you familiar with these frameworks? And can you just put in chat yes or no? I'm curious if you've heard of these before. So the SBI framework focuses on situation, behavior, and impact during a tough conversation when you're managing up. CCL situation. Oh, great. CCL situation, response outcome, SRO, helps you kind of react and respond within a situational setting. And radical candor is about caring personally and challenging directly and really creating transparency with intentionality. And the start, stop, continue framework kind of breaks down things into components to identify and optimize the time being spent, right? So it's almost like a risk mitigator. So that's a really good one during tough conversations to have. And the feed forward approach by Marshall Goldsmith, which focuses on feedback in a way of maximizing that. And then nonviolent communication is understanding how we're using people's triggers for or against our intended outcome. So really interesting ones. If there's any of these that you haven't heard of, can you please put it in the chat? I'm again just curious, but you can Google these, learn more. And my recommendation is that you look for what's a good fit for your personality, your communication style, and test it out. Because if there's something that aligns well with you, that is probably something that you can maximize easily, more naturally, more authentically. And that's when we're more effective, is when we're able to be this way, when we're able to align, to be authentic. And so we're going to use just one script example for today, because this is a very short webinar, but the SBI framework script example. So in breaking it down, here's what it would look like in action, right? So during yesterday's team meeting, you're mentioning the situation. When the timeline was shortened without team input, that's the behavior. It caused some confusion and stress among the group. That's the impact that had. I'd like to discuss how we can better collaborate on future changes, right? So again, this script is intended for the subordinate to the leader. And so the focus of this framework is showing the leader when it happened, how it happened, and what the consequence was. right? And then bringing it back to how can we do this differently in the future? So this is a very simple example, but you can take this example and break down every challenging conversation or exchange you've had and literally see what it tells you. And I think a lot of self-awareness happens in these moments. So if as an exercise, maybe next week, break down a tough conversation you've had and put it into this kind of framework and see what it tells you. And then identify, did you communicate the important aspect of the situation, the behavior, and the impact? So building trust through upward communication. So upward communication is different than across the organization. So we talked a little bit about that in session 1 and 2. And so as we're building trust, as we know, building trust is hard. It takes forever to build and a second to break. So it requires careful handling, no matter what your role, what your disposition is, what your experience level is. It really doesn't matter. Trust is something that we need for successful relationships. So be consistently transparent, share relevant updates, concerns, and wins to build credibility, own your mistakes, demonstrate accountability. It earns respect and fosters psychological safety. And vulnerability to me really speaks to higher level type of intentional leadership because nobody's perfect, right? So deliver on commitments, following through on tasks and deadlines reinforces reliability. Keep your boss informed without overwhelming them. Provide concise, timely updates that help them stay aligned. And so I'll share this. You don't know if the person's overwhelmed by how you update unless you ask them, unless you know how they like to be communicated with. And so that requires a little bit of what we mentioned in session 1 and 2 of get to know your leader in a tactical, transactional, and personal way, right? So there's layers to that. Speak up with respect and intention. Thoughtful communication, even when it's difficult, signals maturity and professionalism, right? It points to integrity. So ask for feedback and act on it. That shows humility, growth mindset, and willingness to improve. So that looks like in conversation saying, how did I handle that? What could I have done different? Even in a tough conversation. And that really kind of sets the tone because so many people seldom take the time to do that or are confident enough in focusing on the end outcome to do it, to understand that that's actually leading to a better outcome, even if it's a little uncomfortable. Understand there's goals and pressures. Empathy helps you align your communication with what matters to them. When you're managing up, it's understanding them, right? And sharing with them your impact and value. Be solution focused, no problem dumping, offer your ideas, not just issues, to become a trusted partner. So in session 2, we talked about the difference between being an employee and having a partner mentality, right? So in a partner mentality, there's an exchange of value. You're not there, just because you have to be. You're there because you're looking to accomplish something together. Very different mindset. And so it plays out very different in our exchanges. Choose honesty over avoidance. I see avoidance all the time in the workplace. And sometimes we don't realize how much it hinders our own growth. And how much it hinders the relationship exchange and how much it gets in our own way of our own success. So do not avoid. Tough truths delivered tactfully build long-term trust more than silence does. Silence and avoidance is not a builder. It does not build. If anything, it takes away. It deducts from the experience, from your success, from your overall impact. Protect confidentiality, so uphold integrity. That means don't gossip around these exchanges as you're managing up. If you're gossiping while trying to manage up, you're not going to succeed. So very, very dangerous slope there. Very easy to lose that. So delivering upward constructive feedback effectively. So I mentioned at the beginning of today's session that we have an entire training dedicated to constructive feedback by itself because it is that strategic, it does require that much tact. And if you're doing it right, you're getting the outcomes out of that exchange that you need or want. And so think about that as we're moving through. But establish psychological safety. So I'm going to break down the neuroscience component because it's important to understand what we're activating in another person when we're managing up and when we're providing constructive feedback. So the neuroscience part is the brain perceives social threats like hierarchy. Similarly to physical threats, activating the amygdala. So just like I mentioned, we have more territory in our brain dedicated to threat. And the reason for it is because we're wired for self-preservation. So there's no coincidences there. It's helped us evolve as human beings, but it works very much in that way. And so the tip is to start by building trust and rapport to reduce fear-based responses and increase receptiveness in the other person. So this is true of your boss because your boss is human. So all humans respond in this way. So it's important for us to acknowledge that. So making sure the time is right. From the neuroscience perspective, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision making and empathy. So functions best when not under stress. So again, it's back to, are we ready to have this conversation? And it's okay for you to say that to your boss, right? Because if they're not ready, there's going to be a limitation there. So the tip is to choose a moment when both you and your manager are calm and focused, not in the middle of the high pressure situation. So taking that step back, asking that question, those are the things that are going to lend to the better outcome, even if it feels uncomfortable when you say it at the beginning. Be specific, not personal. Neuroscience insight is this: vague criticism can trigger the brain's default mode. Okay. DMN. Did you know that the brain had a default mode network? Let me know in chat, yes or no. It leads to defensive rumination. So the tip for that is focus on observable behaviors and their impact, not personality traits, right? So that's like not saying you always do this, right? That kind of thing. Or I've noticed you always do X, right? So how we frame things make a difference in a difficult situation. Use the SCARF model: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And if you haven't heard about it, check it out, Google it. The neuroscience impact is that it threatens any of these 5 social domains that can activate a threat response in the brain. So the tip here is frame feedback to preserve autonomy and demonstrate fairness. So maybe using something like, would you be open to the thought that I had about in our last meeting? Right? Give them an option, give them a choice. So framing feedback as shared goals. From a neuroscience perspective, aligning with shared goals engages the brain's reward system, and it actually activates dopamine. So in a different webinar, we talked about how dopamine plays a role in motivation. That's true of your boss too, because again, they're human. So they react in these very natural ways to these things. So the tip is emphasize mutual objectives and team improvement. This might help us hit our targets faster. That, by the way, helps sync up the understanding that your goals are in line with theirs and that you know what they are. When we don't speak around specific areas like that and connect the dots, the assumption is that we don't know and that we're just trying to get through the conversation. Manage your emotions. In neuroscience, mirror neurons in the brain pick up others' emotional states. If you're tense, it can amplify tension, right? So think of yourself as an emitter, and you're emitting what you want returned back to you. So even in a difficult conversation, be calm, be composed. Other people will respond to that, maybe not immediately, but their brain is processing it. So just keep that in mind. Asking for permission in a difficult conversation. Okay, in a difficult conversation, neuroscience, giving people permission or asking for permission gives people the perception of control and reduces the brain's threat response, which is why giving them options, which is why making suggestions and saying, is it okay for us to move forward? Those kinds of things really kind of help in a difficult situation or exchange. Offer solutions, not just problems. So Problem-focused feedback activates threat responses. Solution-oriented input activates the brain's executive functions and executive centers. So this is to me amazing because depending on how you frame it, depending on what you introduce first, you're either activating the threat response or you're activating the executive function centers, which means you're activating separate parts of the brain depending on how you're communicating in a difficult exchange. So here's the tip. Suggest a potential improvement or ask for collaboration in finding one. Right? So if you take on all of these points, I can tell you that the communication, the exchange will be closer to your intended outcome than not. So these are our key takeaways for today. Navigating difficult conversations is a natural and essential part of managing up. So if you're going to get good at managing up, you're going to get good at navigating difficult conversations because you should expect them. Effectively handling these conversations requires intention, preparation, and consistent practice. So every time you're talking to your manager, you should be thinking, I got to practice managing up, right? And practice some of the things that we've discussed over the past 3 sessions. Using frameworks and scripts support clear communication and strengthens emotional regulation. It also makes you feel more confident when you have a framework or a script to rely upon. So check some of those things out that I mentioned, test them out and see which one's the best fit for you and your communication style. And delivering constructive feedback is a discipline. Mastery comes by following critical, structured steps. So again, this is scientifically proven, actually. Constructive feedback is that important. It is that layered. So it does require a little bit of insight, self-awareness, and strategy behind it. So with that said, we're at the end. So I'll open it up really quickly for a few seconds. Any Q&A, if you have any questions in chat, please feel free to throw them in there. If you want to unmute yourself, please feel free to do so. I'm happy to answer any questions as we get prepared to wrap it up. Okay, I think we are okay to move on. I don't see anything in chat. I don't see anything in YouTube. So let's move on. So training and resources. So you'll be getting a copy of this webinar deck if you registered and have joined. And we have training programs available of all kinds if you're curious about our scientifically proven method. Our neuroscience studies are available as well on our website at www.managementcues.org. Feel free to schedule a free consultation anytime and check out our strategic management collection, which keeps growing with some amazing, simple training tools for managers. Check those out. And then last but certainly not least, we're so excited this week. We kicked off our I Fund Women by Honeycomb Credit crowdfunding campaign to scale management cues to the next level. We've done quite a bit of work around California, and we're stepping into all of the US as of this month. And so we're taking our company to the next level. We'd love for you to be part of that journey. So check out that link and visit us anytime. With that said, I thank you so much for joining us. Our next webinar is going to be on May 9th, and it's going to be on building trust and influence without authority, which is something that gets in the way of many because we think of leadership often as linked to title, which is not the case for leadership or for building influence. And so we will talk about that in our next session. Have an amazing weekend, and thank you so much for joining us. Take care.